everyone, welcome to Beyond Binary Thinking.
The purpose of this podcast is our attempt to be part of the changing zeitgeist, to replace the algorithms of outrage and the Twitter mobs and the YouTube comments and the political pundits all fighting for your attention with something more nuanced, intelligent and honest. From London, I'm Chris.
From Amsterdam, it's Marijn.
From Cordoba, I'm Finn.
And from London, I'm Matt.
Big shouts to Giles and Dana for their positive feedback on the episode on universal basic income. It's great to be inspired by the follow-up conversations with some really fascinating people and opinions. So if you've got any questions or if you fundamentally disagree with us, you can join the discussion anytime. Nally thought that giving everyone an income would cause some inflation of general prices like goods and rent. And apparently this happened with minimum wage when that was implemented. And Nemo agreed that yes, capitalism has helped the poor and the super rich. Yet the middle class is the key to success of capitalism and social mobility. The income's been stagnating since the mid-70s and wasn't keeping up with inflation. And maybe that's still true today.
Yeah, I think so. I'd like to really thank Nally and Nemo, and we would love to have either of you on as guests soon. So please don't be shy. I'd also like to thank Nemo for introducing us to Ved. He's a Buddhist economist and he's got a sense of technology and he's a really great writer as well. So can't recommend you read his blogs enough. We'll be sharing on our pages and hopefully we'll get him on for an episode soon. Now, for those of you that haven't been following us on Facebook, there was a really interesting conversation between Lillian and myself in the comments of our Facebook page. And it spun up a whole new challenge and debate about what's the best way to make a fair meritocracy. And that would probably be worth an episode in and of itself. What I found really impressive is the way she communicated with me. So rather than just push her opinion, she asked a lot of questions and it made me think. And I'd recommend that as a technique for any time you're trying to encourage dialogue with someone, because she really got me thinking a lot. And so apologies if I ranted at you, Lillian. But yeah, thanks a lot for sparking a really fascinating conversation.
Cool. And thanks for the topic suggestions. Much respect to Jared and everyone else that suggested the topic for the episode this month. I'm really glad to see that people are thinking about an issue like this. That's so important to me. So definitely keep these suggestions coming.
Yeah, so what's the belief we have got beef with this week? Well, this week we're going to discuss why does everyone hate vegans? The problems with eating meat, but also how vegans became so infamous for failing to persuade people to their cause. And if anything can be done to change people's eating habits.
We're going to try a different format out this week and switch it up. So we've brought a fourth guest and panellist on, and we hope to do this more often in the future. So thanks for joining us, Matt.
Thank you.
Despite the aggressive clickbait title, we're very pleased you joined us. You're the most charming vegan gentleman.
Maybe he's the exception that proves the rule. Sorry, Matt. Sorry. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about you. Your journey towards veganism, and I understand you do a bit of campaigning. So if you could just intro yourself, really, that'd be interesting.
Yeah. So I'm Matt. I'm 29, nearly 30 years old now. I've lived in quite a few different places around the world. That's where I met you, Chris, in Thailand. My journey really started, with regards to this, in a place called Chantaburi in Thailand. I was a meat eater at the time, but I had a vegetarian girlfriend who was very interested in veganism at the time as well.
That's how they always get you, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. She was working
Just
a magic.
wait for my story.
Anyway, I moved into a house, really nice house, had no idea where it was, as in, what was around it rather. And my first evening, I spent the night listening to a pig slaughterhouse, basically what was going on in a pig slaughterhouse. And I literally vowed that night, I feel like it was probably the final nail in the coffin to go vegetarian at least. I'd had enough of the squeals because they were doing their killing in the evening. So I didn't sleep that night. It was painful to listen to. So yeah, I went vegetarian on the spot from that point, and I stayed vegetarian for 3 years. I remained ignorant to the goings on of other industries like dairy and eggs. So I only went vegan about just under a year ago, and that was purely just through a conversation I had with someone who's actually known in the vegan world as he's quite famous. He's like the vegan Jesus. He looks like Jesus. Well, Vegas. I might tell him that one.
Change his name.
Yeah, change his name.
Copyright maybe could be an issue there.
And just one conversation with him about dairy and eggs, and that was it. And then I realised that it was more than just a diet. It was it was about a lifestyle, and I really cared, and I just wanted to align my morals with future actions, and that's my story basically. And since then, it's grown into more of an active role within the vegan community. So
what kind of things do you do in terms of activism?
Well, activism is quite a wide spectrum. So I do street activism, which includes things like having discussions with people on the streets, not going up to people, but inviting people over to have conversations with me through art demos that they may have seen or something like that.
Isn't this called the Cube? Maybe you could explain that just from to someone who has, for example, no idea what the Cube is or how vegan activism works. Yeah,
so in the particular with the Cube, there is a movement called Anonymous for the Voiceless, aptly named. They started in Australia, in Melbourne, about 2 years ago now. And what it is, essentially, is literally a cube of people, whether that be 4, 8, 12, however. You've got the same amount of people on each side at a 90-degree angle of each other. They've all got V for Vendetta masks on. The reason they wear those is so that they sort of de-personify themselves, because they're actually holding a device, so like a laptop or an iPad or something, that is showing like footage of various forms of animal exploitation, whether that be slaughterhouse, farm, factory, laboratory, things like that. So people are sort of drawn in by that, or scared away, of course. But a lot of people do come and have a little look, and then we have outreaches around the side of this cube that will interact with those people that are interested in learning more. Essentially, we're just trying to help people sort of make that connection between where their foods come from, or where their clothing has come from, and what it was before. The fact it was a life before, and that we don't need to do this anymore to animals across the world in any form. So that's one way. That's the Cube of Truth by Anonymous for the Voiceless. Then we've got like vigils. So that's when you turn up outside a slaughterhouse, and we have an agreement already in place with the slaughterhouses beforehand, but we essentially spend a couple of minutes of time with the animals on, on the trucks that are coming in. Get some footage as well, so that we can get that on social media and show other people, that these were actually animals before you bought them from a supermarket or something like that,
and what sort of, does this happen at night, or
no? It's not just at night.
It seems quite hidden. Like, you don't really tend to see these kind of trucks driving around at all hours of the day.
You're right, absolutely right.
Or does that happen?
It's weird, actually. I mean, there's a couple of slaughterhouses within an hour of me, and they are both down really sort of dark, like B roads. You can kind of smell them from about half a mile away, but you don't really know where they are. And then, when you go down these lanes, then you do actually start realizing what's around that area. There's a chicken one. They go through about 350,000 chickens a week. It's halal priest-done slaughterhouse. And then there's also a pig slaughterhouse near me as well. And that's a gas chamber. So they lower pigs into gas chambers in order to, it's their version of stunning, but a lot of them die from that, obviously.
Yeah, and don't animals try and break out? Like, I've heard a few stories recently of animals that have kind of broken out on the way to the slaughterhouse. This is quite interesting, because then maybe you have like a bit of a social media story or a news story that, there was a bull in Spain, for example, who, Fernando the bull, and he kind of jumped out the bull ring and ran off and escaped. Yeah.
Wow,
and then basically went through this town, and then like I think a few people got injured. Maybe they were trying to stop him or not. I'm not sure, but he basically ran, and then he escaped, and they were like trying to hunt him down. There was like a whole police investigation.
He's still free.
No, well,
He's hiding.
I'm not sure what the conclusion was, but basically there were these kids swimming in a river, and they spotted them, so they told people, and then they found him. He just joined a group of like cattle in the field, and he was just chilling with them, and he was like, then he just stopped running because he was like, oh, just here are my mates, and, but I don't know what the conclusion was, so I'll have to find out more about that story.
Yeah, I mean, for your listeners as well, just to hone in on what that means from any animal's perspective. The fact that you can say that an animal might not be on the same sort of intellectual scale as us as humans, but ultimately, it's obviously scared. It has emotions. It doesn't want to die. It probably knows that it's in trouble, especially in a bullfighting ring. It might know what's coming to him. It's probably not been treated extremely very well before. So, I find that, if people can make that sort of connection, realize that bull actually was, trying to escape pain and suffering, it's quite interesting when you think about it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting concept, that you don't have to accept that animals are sentient on the same level as humans, but they're sentient enough to not want to suffer. That seems to be... There was a famous quote by Jeremy Bentham about that, wasn't there? It's not can they talk or can they feel, but can they suffer?
Yeah.
Clearly they can. And that's interesting about the anonymous thing, that they wear the mask, which is, I guess the idea is to raise awareness of the anonymity of these. I guess it's to raise the awareness about the anonymity of these animals who are being processed.
Yeah.
What about you guys? Have you sort of tried veganism? Have you looked into it? Do you know anyone that is vegan?
Finn, you want to go off first?
Yeah, so I've also become vegan this year. My story is a bit like, for the last 4 to 5 years, I started to cut down my meat intake, and I rarely have been buying meat to eat at home, for example, over the last 4.5 years. So I've been living in Spain for about 4.5 years, and I haven't really eaten much meat at home. And then I never really liked milk. So there was a bit where I drank milk, but generally I have eczema too, so it's not so good to eat milk and cheese. Cheese was maybe a bit harder to give up. But I always had this, maybe this kind of unfounded fear, or like a thing about, I don't know about calling myself vegetarian or vegan, because I was maybe a bit worried about being judged if I failed. But then when you think about it, it's kind of ridiculous, because if you're learning anything, a language, a musical instrument, failure is the key, is to fail and carry on and reflect on that failure and work that into how can you improve yourself as a musician, as a language learner, or whatever context. So then I was talking to my brother about it, and he said, well, why don't you just give it a try? So I was thinking about that, and I thought, I may as well try. I said, I'm trying to be vegan. So before I said I'm vegan, I said, well, I'm trying to be vegan. So I was like doing it, but then being lenient with myself from time to time. And I'd been using this meal replacement thing. I don't know if we can mention brand names. Can we mention brand names?
Yeah,
Huel?
why not?
Why not?
Maybe
Huel, if you want to sponsor our podcast, get in touch.
Yeah, mate, this is
Huel
Blue
is like...
Peter.
Yeah, we're not the BBC, so I don't think we have to worry. So Huel is like a meal replacement that's like environmentally low impact, it's vegan and it's plant-based, and it has very little packaging, and it's supposed to be nutritionally complete. That's the idea. So I thought, well, I'm going to give that a try, because my brother had tried it, a few other people I know. And with that, I found it much easier, because I could use this to know that I was getting all the nutrition right and everything like that. And then I was learning more and more. And then, I guess it just transitioned into veganism, really.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
So this year, more or less. What about you, Marijn and Chris?
Well, I'm amazed, Finn, that you did so much of this just by your own perspective, although that's the person I know you at as well. Like, I know you as someone who likes to look up something new language, new instrument, and fall down, pick yourself up again and learn it.
I must say at this point, though, I had my girlfriend's also vegan, but I was trying this.
Okay.
Listen. I was on this path before I'd met her. Or before we got to know each other. So, and then when I met her, it was like, she was also like an example that I could follow, which I think is a really key thing.
Yeah.
When you know someone well enough that they can, and they're living healthily, they're really strong, they're showing you loads of interesting information and ways of cooking, for example, and then that just makes the process easier, I think. So it wasn't all off my own back. I can't say that really.
I'm
and also
suspicious.
people I know talking about it.
Can I ask Matt, come on now, you're amongst friends. Tell us the truth, right? There are these camps where they train these sexually open-minded, attractive women to go and recruit, right? Because that's what I see happening. That's my conspiracy theory of the day.
Chris, you should wait for the end of the podcast where we do the controversial opinion.
Okay. I'll save it to then.
I'll save my answer for then.
Okay, cool. Anyway, carry on, Finn, carry on.
What about you, Moraine?
Well, I'll first of all complete the trilogy of having been ultimately convinced by a vegan girlfriend. But I would like to take it even back earlier. Two people influenced me, mostly thinking of it in a different way, which is two friends of mine that were vegetarian. And this was when I was around 18, 19, 33 now. And one of them had worked one summer in a slaughterhouse.
Oh.
And after that one summer in the slaughterhouse, he stopped eating meat forever.
Yeah.
And he basically didn't have to tell more than just that single statement, which made extremely much sense for me. I could completely understand the perspective where he was in, where he came from having seen it up so close. And I could understand that having seen suffering that close by on that scale would turn you off from eating such a thing. But yeah, I continued on eating meat. Second friend of mine did a acid trip, LSD, came out changed person in many, many different perspectives, many different ways. But one of them was that he immediately turned vegetarian because within this self-learning experience he had on acid, he realized that this suffering, he didn't want to contribute to that.
Was it a good trip or a bad trip?
It was a good trip, I think. Any trip that causes self-improvement, I think is a good trip.
Well,
you didn't
subjective,
answer my
right?
question, though. At the time, was he enjoying himself, or did he have, flashes of rivers of blood? Like, what was it?
I think any good trip that causes self-improvement is quite a tough, confronting trip while you're having it.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to put a mirror on in front of you, and you're supposed to look at elements of yourself that maybe you didn't want to deal with before that.
Like
And
Joe Rogan.
This can cause an opening up.
Joe Rogan says, those people who they take a bit of weed and then they get super paranoid. He's like, there's probably something just below their consciousness that they're avoiding thinking about. And maybe they should. Maybe the weed's not a bad thing.
Maybe
for
confront
them.
it.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned Joe Rogan, actually,
Yeah, go on.
on this podcast. No, he's just a massive vegan skeptic. So I've heard a lot of his arguments.
Well,
He's a big
he's a
hunter,
hunter.
I think, right? Yeah. He's had vegans on his podcast, and he's had really good conversations. But then he'll just completely backtrack on the next episode and have.
Well, Joe Rogan does the Louis Theroux thing, right? He agrees with whoever's on the podcast and just encourages them to speak more and more.
Fair play, yeah, fair enough.
But I mean, as a hunter, he is really against when city-dwelling liberals have an opinion on how people in the country live, and I do sort of understand that perspective actually. And I think you compare one person hunting to the mass slaughter of the industrialized meat industry, and I think you're picking the wrong enemy if you're picking on someone that's sustainably hunting. Really, it's probably not the problem.
It's not the problem, but it is. I mean, from an animal liberationist perspective, it's still a problem. I mean, it's not some. I guess everyone's different, and inherently, we have various levels of compassion and things like that. But I'm from the country myself. I've lived in city and country for extended periods of time, and not that really has any effect on what I'm saying, but I still cannot grasp or cannot sort of like in my head work out how someone even gets a connection, with an animal from, shooting at it from 100 meters away, and then, claiming that they have that connection with that animal and it was all it was all like spiritual and everything like that. Like Joe Rogan talks about it from almost from a spiritual perspective quite often.
Oh,
doesn't he?
yeah. So the best book there is Zen and the Art of Archery, and especially like Joe Rogan's more and more into bow hunting now.
Yeah, but this is also the exoticizing of traditional hunting cultures, right? I think Joe Rogan does this a lot. Joe Rogan fetishizes and exoticizes the more traditional human.
Yeah.
And I think he gets it totally wrong as well, because hunting for traditional cultures was not really the common tribal activity. Not always guarantees to success, and I don't think they looked at it the same way modern hunters do at all. But I'm just going to bring it back for 1 second to where I was going at with talking about my friends who turned vegetarian, because this happened when I was 18, 19, and I didn't go vegan until this year. And so why not? Because the weird thing for me, I guess, is that I realized back then when they told me immediately that they were on the morally correct perspective. But society makes it so easy to ignore this morally correct perspective. You can go through the next 12 years of your life without feeling judged for participating in this mass violence, which is what I did. But all the while realizing that my perspective was not the right perspective. So I did cut down here and there, became more and more what people here in Holland have adopted, which is a flexitarian perspective. Keep eating meat, but try to reduce it down. Then had a vegan girlfriend who was maybe more of the why does everyone hate vegans type. Very
the one that was hated, or the one that didn't understand
the one that will be hated, right? So very like my perspective is right, your perspective is wrong, I'm not even going to discuss it with you. How could you be so wrong for thinking it?
Sounds persuasive. Yeah.
So not really of the persuasive kind, but nestled in maybe a bit more thought about veganism. And then when I met my current girlfriend, I was already at the point where I was very ready to make the full switch. And she definitely made it easier because she knew very well how to cook vegan meals.
That's a good start if you have a girlfriend that can cook good vegan meals.
Yeah.
But good any meals is a bonus, right?
Any meals, yeah. Chris.
Oh man,
you haven't said
you've
about
been so
yourself.
silent.
Yeah, for God's sake! Why do I always have to play the conservative everyman here? For fuck's sake!
Because you are.
I tell you why. Because if not, it's just a hippie circle jerk with you all agreeing with each other, and no one needs to listen to that fucking podcast. I really like. What's the point of us all sitting around agreeing? So, allow me to go full carnivore for a second. I think you gents raise some good arguments for being vegan, but do you know why the majority of people find you thoroughly unconvincing, and if I'm honest, quite annoying? Like, are you familiar with these arguments?
I have my ideas about that, but go ahead, Chris. I'd like to hear yours.
We hinted at it earlier when we were talking about vegans and religious people, and I think from the outside, they're remarkably similar. Like, for me, a vegan diet is almost like the modern equivalent of the monks that self-flagellate, when they whip themselves.
But the difference is there's a victim, right?
Yeah.
Well,
the only victim in the self-flagellation
not
is
just
the
one
person
victim,
who's flagellating themselves.
No, well, this is what I disagree with, because when you're denying yourself yummy food, you are punishing yourself for the benefit of how it looks to others.
Yeah, but Chris, it's interesting you mentioned yummy food. One of the most common sort of ends of an argument from a vegan perspective is taste more important than the life of an animal? And that taste not just being, a life could be up to, if it's a cow, it could be 20, 25 years. If it's taste, it's 5-10 minutes.
Well, yeah, but how many people get to eat a cow? So if you, let's say 500 people get to eat a cow. So if you 500 times, that's quite a long amount of pleasure. on the balance of things.
So pleasure is great, Chris.
Are you
Pleasure is
taking the
great.
utilitarian argument?
Why are we not taking heroin every single day? Pleasure is great.
Mate, I got a job.
Right?
Like, it's problems.
Okay, so maybe there are other things in life
really
that count as well,
interfere
like
with,
health,
a healthy heroin
responsibility, not causing suffering to not just one being but billions of beings.
Okay, but part of being a good member of society is to not be annoying and not preach your views and values at people when you disagree. And there are a lot of different values and views you could go with, right? From the religious people who think everyone's sinning and going to hell, those people that think homosexuality is a sin, those people that think you shouldn't get on at flights because that's bad for the environment, those people obsessed with all sorts of things. And so
there's definitely viewpoints you do not need to share with everyone. But then again, it took a war to end slavery.
Yeah,
and people were willing to fight a war.
Slavery
people were willing to fight a war
When
to
did slavery
convince
end?
another group of people that this was not the right perspective anymore.
When did slavery end, Meringue? I didn't get that memo.
Well, slavery probably still exists, but there was still a war fought over an opinion there. And it was a war a lot of people felt necessary to fight because people were holding an opinion that devalued other beings to a status that they didn't deserve, right?
It sounds like
another form of exploitation.
Yeah, but it sounds like the war on drugs and the war on terror, the war on slavery didn't necessarily solve the problem. Look, I'm gonna hand the mic back over to you, but I just want to make the point, right? That there are a lot of really annoying vegans, just like someone that's recently quit smoking or just joined a religion, right? And sometimes I feel like they're just piously virtue signaling, right? And they're spending more time talking about how morally superior they are than they are actually at effectively engaging people in a constructive dialogue.
Are you sure of that?
Can you give us an example?
I don't recognize that necessarily.
Well, you do.
Talking
You
about
said
how
your
morally
ex-girlfriend
superior
was your ex-girlfriend was that.
Yeah,
right?
one of them. No, I know one vegan that talked aloud about how morally superior she was. I know more vegans that don't.
It's the stereotype, though, right? Like, you guys know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and there's a very fine line I find, especially. I mean, my family and my closest friends, none of them are vegan. So for them to engage in conversation with me about veganism, which happens regularly, I always find that I always have like a guilty sort of sense of. Within the conversation, I almost feel a bit guilty because I feel like I'm ending up turning it around and becoming that person that you're describing there, Chris. But at the same time, I know that they're the ones who's engaged in they're the one who started the conversation.
That is quite interesting because that's what I noticed. I've been eating vegan now for 2.5 months, and I've told the people at work.
Yeah.
And ever since then, almost every lunch and almost every dinner I've had with my colleagues has been the conversation of veganism, has been the primer conversation at dinner. But not coming from me, it's coming from them.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I found the same.
So there's an endless fascination on non-vegans on why people do this to themselves. And it comes, I think, sometimes from Chris, what you're saying is that humans have gotten maybe partly convinced that all they're alive for is to be the king of the world and to have everything they can have, right? Big screen TV, great meal, the best wine, as many laughs as we can have. But I think a lot of people as well realize that this is not the primary reason why we're alive on this earth.
Mm. Yeah, I agree.
Chris, can I ring the logical fallacy bell?
We need a bell for that.
Do you not think it's... Yeah, we should get an actual bell. Do you not think it's a bit of a false analogy, a false dichotomy, equating vegans to religions and not to other social justice campaigns? Because Moraine kind of made the point about slavery. You could take equal rights, the women's vote. You could take homosexuality. All of these issues...
Well, homosexuality is a bit
really
different,
annoying
right?
at the time, right? Who did, back in the day, people found that stuff annoying. And I like to think that if I was alive in the time of slavery, I would have done something to try and bring a quicker end to it than was going to happen. And for me, this seems like the equivalent nowadays of a similar kind of situation. I'm not going to say they're the same, but I'd say it's similar in that respect of like, I think personally that meat eating is eventually going to die out. I think probably in 50 to 100 years. So the way I see it is like, oh, well, how can I educate people if they're curious about it, draw attention to the issue, give information, provide a good model of how easy it is and cheap it can be to eat good quality vegan food, all of these things, without being preachy. Although I think there is I think it's acceptable for some people to be preachy.
So I've been soul searching a lot about this in preparation for this episode. I've been thinking like why I feel hostility. And honestly, like, it'd be better for me not to say this, but just honestly exposing what's in my heart. I genuinely have felt hatred for vegans at some times. Like really
so
anger.
Why? Where did it come from?
Yeah, well, I think, so you guys familiar with the psychological term cognitive dissonance?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, could you explain that for the audience, though, just in case anyone listening doesn't know?
Yeah,
what
so
that
it ties in with what Matt said earlier, where your values reflect your actions. The studies that went into cognitive dissonance are fascinating. This guy must have been a joker and a half, because what he did was he would get people to do a really boring experiment. You have to do your lecturer's experiments as part of college credit, right? So you're showing up to a bunch of experiments, and he would make people sit for 2 hours just doing sums on a sheet of paper. And the instructions were that when they finished each page, they would scrunch it up into a ball and throw it in the bin. And so for 2 hours, they did absolutely waste of time experiment that they knew was serving no value. And he paid them, different participants, 3 different amounts: a low amount, a high amount, and a middle amount. And fascinatingly enough, he found that the people he paid the least reported that the experiment was the most enjoyable. And the reason for that is, if you paid people a lot, they go, well, okay, it was a shit experiment, but at least I got paid. So they sort of externalize the action and the reward, right? Whereas if you paid people the least, they just had this cognitive dissonance in them, the mismatch between the two. And so that they would convince themselves they were doing the right thing. Now, you can extrapolate this, and some studies have, so that when your actions don't match your values, you sort of rationalize it. So I've noticed this a few times. I, as you know, try and be a moral person. I used to have a turtle conservation project I worked with closely. Used to be very strict on turning lights off, picking up rubbish, recycling. And it really bothered me when someone would then come and talk to me about veganism. And I think the reason was because I wasn't ready to do that. So I felt judged by them. And I felt guilty, I guess, if I'm honest. But rather than internalize that guilt, I'd just bounce it back at them and be like, fuck you. Why the hell do you think you're better than me? You probably do all sorts of, immoral shit. How about you go fuck yourself?
I recognize that. I think this is what happens with everyone. It is like, imagine one day you wake up and someone tells you, right, rather than being the sweet, cute kid that your mother always told you were, you're a good person, you're growing up as a normal part of society. Someone tells you, no, you're an animal, you're a beast, you're responsible for mass slaughter, mass torture, mass suffering, mass genocide, right? It's kind of hard to take in and accept for yourself. And I've had it where I watched a video on the dairy industry. And I just had this realization of what kind of animal I am, what kind of animal sapiens is, what we've turned into. And it was a heavy thing to take in and to internalize and to do something with myself, rather than to sort of shake off and blind myself for, because I cannot deal with this truth.
So what I've done in preparation for this, because I'm not a vegan, I don't have vegan stories to share, but I am a psychologist. And so I've sort of collated kind of the best guide to how a minority can persuade a majority. And I've, based on the social psychology research, I've put together a bit of a guide on how to be a persuasive vegan.
Well, it's interesting, Chris. I mean, if you're asking vegans to change, is it possible to persuade you to become vegan in any way?
Oh,
What would your, in fact, a better question than that. What angle for you is the most important angle to sort of, explore? Would that be from a nutritional standpoint, or from a moral standpoint, or from an environmental standpoint?
yeah. Man, that's a good point. I think it came up. We were talking to the bearded vegans from their podcast, and that was their main feedback to me is, if I'm going to ask vegans to change, am I prepared to change myself? And if not, why are we having this conversation? It's a bit disingenuous, right?
I think it's wrong in any way to people will change, but people will change based on their own agency. It's very hard to enforce change on people. So I think a change needs to come as a lot from the industry as well. Finn hit this point when he said it was cheap and easy to find replacements. Here in the Netherlands, the supermarkets have become a lot more vegan friendly in the last few years. We have a brand called Vegan Butcher, which has become very popular for making meat replacement products that are completely plant-based. And we're even getting the kweekvlees, what's the English word for it? Grown meat. So stem cell grown meat. Yeah, lab grown meat here.
Yeah.
Holland was supposed to be the first country to introduce it actually this year, but it's gotten delayed through EU law issues on novel foods, and it has to go through another 2-year certification process. But it's ready. It's actually lying inside fridges now here in the Netherlands.
Wow.
Fully consumer ready lab grown meat. But I think it's a lot to do with the industry providing more and more alternatives that people can easily get. And I've seen it when I go through the cookie aisle and other aisles where they have egg products inside of it, where they don't need to, because you can get potato proteins inside of there rather than egg proteins to make the same kind of product. But the whole industry is just so used to putting all these things in there that you have to look for it. And I don't think people want that. I think people just want, I want to have that, and I want to have that. And
So
just on that point, sorry, Chris. I mean, Chris and I, we were in a large supermarket.
we were in Asda,
earlier.
you can say it. Until Tesco sponsor us, we'll keep going to Asda.
because Asda is one of the major chains in the UK, right?
Yeah, we were in a large. We went round, and it was very interesting from my perspective to see, to hear Chris's questions about, how do you know what's vegan and what isn't vegan, and doesn't that get annoying when you have to keep looking? When maybe the first time you do it, when you start looking at the ingredients on the back of products. I can understand why people might find that annoying and time consuming. But once you've done it once, and maybe a couple of other times for other new products that you haven't tried yet, then you already know that this product has milk or eggs in there, or honey or something like that. And it was really interesting to see Chris's reactions earlier, especially when it came to when it came to wine. and just seeing that there were egg and milk, in like white and red wines. He was
they use fish glue to clear the wine.
Another one. Yeah,
it doesn't really tell on most of the wines. I think there's only one brand that me and my girlfriend were able to find here in the Netherlands in the local supermarket that had a clear V sign on it for being vegan, but that is not completely adopted.
It was eye-opening shopping with Matt earlier. I think some of the things were a surprise. It was amazing the number of aisles. There was nothing for us there. You're like, okay, next. And that was kind of my main trepidation with the vegan thing. I think you hit the point hard earlier, Meringue, and that comes down to how high the bar is to entry, right? So
Yeah.
it's
Definitely.
I get annoyed with preachy vegans. I get annoyed with preachy anyone, and the social psychologist in me just wants to break down. Here's how you be more persuasive, right? It's like the anti-Darren Brown. Some people, I'm like, you're turning so many people off to your cause right now. Just stop it. But that's what bothers me more than anything, is how ineffective they're being. But the other one is a barrier to entry, and I don't want to pretend that that's not real. So I intentionally brought Matt to Asda because I knew if we went to a high-end supermarket, there would have been a lot more choice, right? But the majority of people shop at Asda or Tesco's. So I wanted to see, okay, can we do this shop? And it's a huge Asda, by the way, right? There's no shortage of choice there. And yet it was very difficult. So we didn't find any vegan butter substitutes nor any vegan cheeses.
There would have been vegan butter. That's been around for a while.
Maybe somewhere, but we looked and we didn't find it,
vegan
right?
cheese,
so for the average person who's getting into it, if it's hard to find, you're not gonna, because we were looking pretty hard. And then we're trying to make a nut loaf, and we needed, was it flax and oat and
flaxseed? Yeah.
Some
Did
things
you
we
check
just
the
couldn't
bread
find.
department as well? Because a lot of breads will have milk proteins in there, which is unnecessary because you can put soy proteins in there, be the same bread.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying to Chris earlier, in the UK, we're blessed actually. We have, most of our sort of mainstream breads are actually vegan friendly. Your big brands like Hovis and Warburton's, they don't use animal products.
But I can imagine, in the United States, that's probably not the case in plenty of supermarkets.
I couldn't even.
Right.
I
mean, I know here in the Netherlands, enough brands and enough supermarkets are doing it as well. But it's also a recent change. I think this is also something from the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And that shows how the market changing creates more people to become, be it veganism, vegetarian or flexitarian, because flexitarian has actually helped the vegan market grow here. Since about 2/3 of the Netherlands people eat flexitarian.
Well, look at
the market
halal
has
food,
grown
right?
exponentially, and with the market growing, the economy growing, more and more companies are joining in on it.
Look at gluten-free, right? It only takes a small minority voting with their dollars for supermarkets to respond. So now that there always will be a gluten-free option. The main thing I noticed shopping was the surprises. So a lot of the cheaper beers aren't vegan friendly. They have animal products in, which was concerning. I don't know why you need to put bits of animals in a beer. But
I think
No, but
I think that comes down to a
this
traditional
is the clearing, right, of the beer, same as the wine.
Yeah, it comes down to the traditional way of doing things. I think that's what they've used. I'm not sure if I'm right in saying that during the Victorian era, they realised when it was during the filtering process, they can use animal products like fish. It's called isinglass, which is basically fish guts.
A lot of good beer brands don't do this. Most
anymore.
Dutch
No, not
specialty
the high
beers,
end.
Belgium specialty beers, they don't do this.
no, it was it's to a T. It was all the cheapest
Guinness,
ones.
they don't.
Yeah, all the cheapest ones were the ones with the meat.
Frosties.
And look, if it makes sense if you think about it, because if you have this mass industrialized meat industry, you're going to have a lot of byproducts, right? So rather than make the chemicals on the side, you have these byproducts being made anyway that are otherwise going to get thrown away. So it makes sense that that's the cheapest source, I guess.
But don't you also think that we've subsidized this with animal suffering?
Well, of course.
Well, it's right. I mean,
Yeah.
meat and dairy are both subsidised, aren't they? Especially in the UK.
But not just financially subsidized.
Oh,
We've upped the speed at which animals are slaughtered. We've the speed of the things going through the factory. We've upped animal suffering and upped the industry, and by upping the industry, we've been able to produce it cheaper. But we're literally subsidizing this food by higher animal suffering.
And on that point, but also just to bring it back a little while, when Chris was saying about the entry barrier for veganism. It was interesting. While we were shopping, I was thinking about it, but we didn't actually go down the aisles for cleaning products and things like that. And this is one thing that people just have no idea about. When it comes to animal testing on like cleaning products, on cosmetics, on things like that, and that's a whole another story. There are so many brands that are in our supermarkets that have used animal testing in the past or continue to use them now. And you've got no way of finding out unless you Google it and research as you're going along with your shopping cart.
And even then, you might not.
And even then, you might not find it.
People have asked these big companies and not gotten a good response. Because here in the Netherlands, animal testing has been banned since the end of the 90s.
Same in England. Same in the UK.
Dutch brands. But then you have Unilever, which is a global company which does animal testing, which has Dutch sub-brands. To which the question, is there been any animal testing done on the chemicals that are in this product, can't really be answered. Because maybe, let's take my hair shampoo brand, maybe that brand itself, maybe not, but then Unilever and other parts will have done, and those parts will be in the Andrelon product. So they can't really answer the question. And most products don't even mention it. Right? You have the leaping bunny. Maybe we should tell people to look out for there's a leaping bunny that some products will have branded on them. But then these vegan trademarks, they all cost money and certification processes that not all companies that are vegan will go through.
But then it will come down to, I think the end consumer has the power there. Obviously, if they know, if they can know, if they can educate on themselves on what products, like for instance Unilever, their little subsidiary brands here and there, they've got loads of them, haven't they? If they can use those products that don't use animal testing, then that demand is, it's obviously the power is in the end consumer's hands. Then that demand will be risen for that product.
But the production of information is not in the consumer's hands.
No, exactly, no. But, that's something that I'm personally trying to work on, obviously, as an activist myself. Mm-hmm. The other thing I was going to say, actually, just quickly, was a little hack, I guess. In a way, you can find out whether or not a brand uses animal testing. And that is, if that brand trades in China, then you know that they do animal testing. Because by law, Chinese law, this is a fact, by Chinese law, they have to have tested on animals to be allowed to trade in China. And obviously China is one of the biggest, in fact, probably the biggest economy in the world. So that's one way of finding out. If you know that if you use a cosmetics brand and you find out that they trade in China, then it's guaranteed basically that they test on animals. So there you go.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Good little tip.
Yeah.
Well, not to offend any Chinese, but at the moment, anything that's accepted in China raises big doubts with me.
Racist.
But Chris, I was gonna say as well, right? Because we've talked about we were talking about information and the production of information and the persuasion of people, and then I think that when the meat industry and the animal industry is subsidized to such degree that the dietary institutions of every country will recommend that this is necessarily part of your diet.
Oh, you're talking about the
commercials for the necessity of milk and eggs in your diet.
Yeah.
At that point, the vegan message is going to be drowned out by a message from a government perspective that a lot more people are going to be leaning to listen to.
We've all grown up in different countries at some point, right? I'm willing to bet you've all seen a food pyramid. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, or a circle or whatever it might be.
Are you familiar? Do you know that food pyramid is entirely a work of fiction and it's produced by lobbyists from the food industry? Did you know that?
Yeah.
I'm serious.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you look at that triangle, if you look at the bottom of it, it's like carbs, wheat and bread and barley. And you're like, and that should be the majority of your food. And no nutritionist would ever say that, right? To be honest, all things in balance. And if you talk to any nutrition, they'll say all things in balance, all things in moderation. vegetables
That's
are good.
not really true, though, is it?
Yeah.
Is that really true? All things in balance. What about smoking?
Yeah.
Let's not
There are
get
some things which.
Okay, before we get into the philosophy of that, heroin imbalance,
sorry.
yeah, sure. but you know, that triangle is the opposite of that, right? And the idea that you should have loads and loads of barley and corn and wheat is exactly paid for by the people that produce it. And then I think second up on that will be meat, right? And again, like if you look, the meat industry has powerful lobbyists. You guys talked about growing meat in labs. There are currently big lobby groups in America that are stopping not just that, but also like tofu burgers from advertising themselves as burgers.
Oh, this has already happened.
Yeah,
right?
because the cattle ranchers, are fighting hard.
Dairy is a protected name. You cannot have any non-milk dairy products.
Called milk.
Cheese is a protected name. You cannot have vegan cheese because cheese supposedly made from milk, supposedly made from animals, and it's a protected word.
Yeah.
Yogurt is.
Hasn't France actually banned the word milk on plant milks and nut milks?
I think Germany has, and here in Netherlands is an issue as well.
Oh,
Yogurt is not allowed as a branding for soy yogurt. It's a soy plant-based products or something.
I think they call it like a nut juice or something like that. But I think
They call something
So I
nut
just-
juice Jesus.
yeah. Well, their justification though is that people might end up picking up the wrong product.
That's hilarious. Oh, someone might accidentally not torture a cow. Man, that is.
Chris said it.
Can I say that is a masterclass in anti-marketing? To be like, yeah, you want to sell your shit? You have to call it nut juice. Good luck selling that. Wow, that is
really
some black
it doesn't matter too much,
anti-marketing right there. Fucking hell. No,
I
these
think it doesn't matter too much because now in the supermarket you have the milks, then you just have like all the soy stuff, and it's like it's clear where they're in the same section in the supermarket.
Finn,
if the supermarket made it, put them all at the back of the supermarket.
I'm
maybe
going to
that would be a
disagree with you
bigger
the
issue.
hardest here, Finn. Like, you are thinking for yourself and have decided to go a vegan path and experiment, right? As Meringue said, you're different to a lot of people.
Yeah.
But, advertising for food is a billion-dollar industry. Words matter. The packaging matters. Where it's positioned in the supermarket matters. There are multi-millionaires who are consultants for this sort of thing. And so when a lobby takes the time to push American government and EU government to stop this or stop that, that will be backed by strong research science. You've got Matt standing in the street, bless him, compared to these multi-billion-dollar industries changing laws and changing how things are allowed to be branded. And it is making change harder. It's easy to sell, like, here's milk, but no cows were tortured. That would be an easy sell. But they're not allowed to say that. They're like, here's soya nut juice.
Yeah, you're completely right, Chris, and I've actually changed my opinion.
Hey! This podcast is good for something. With that in mind,
I think it's a hard thing to say, though, isn't it? It's for some people. It's hard to say. Well, that's a really good point.
what
Maybe I'll
nut
change
juice
my
is hard to swallow, man. I tell you.
mind. I'd swallow nut juice.
I think should I rein it in a bit? Should we get a bit sensible?
Do you want to talk to us a bit about psychology, Chris?
Yeah.
About the psychology of persuasion and change, and your guide that you've put together for us.
Yeah.
For the listeners.
So I think it is really interesting because. Sorry. Let me start again.
Ding ding ding! Yeah, thesaurus, mate.
We did that joke last episode. We're moving on. I think it's a discussion worth having because despite me being more aware than most that the cognitive dissonance I feel is part of why I dislike vegans, it still is really important to think from a vegan perspective, especially people who are taking the time to stand in the street and try and be persuasive, right? How do we make them more effective? And there is a surprising amount of research that's been done into minorities persuading majorities because it's a fascinating phenomenon. And it's if a minority can't persuade the majority, then you get a tyranny of democracy. right? And the two things you hinted at earlier, like the suffragettes or gay rights, it's really important for the minority point to be able to slowly persuade the majority. And there's really good research that's gone into it. And I also think that there's this straw man of what a vegan is. This, as I hinted at earlier, like annoying, lecturing, holier than thou. And that is a stereotype.
Boring.
Yeah. Meek, weak.
There's a really funny documentary called
Protein
Carnage.
deficient.
It's like a mockumentary. It's a mockumentary that looks at today's vegans and the vegans of the past from the year 2067. And they look back and then they're saying, vegans were still boring and not even allowed on telly. And then when they were allowed on telly, it just ridiculizes the kind of straw man argument of what vegans are. It's called Carnage by Simon Amstel. Well worth
Oh, yeah, it's fantastic.
really funny.
Yes.
Really funny.
BBC iPlayer, just so you know.
Yeah, check it out. So I think it's worth having this discussion, even if, everyone you talk to isn't necessarily persuadable, especially now more of the conversations are happening online on social media. Even if you're arguing with someone who you can't persuade them, people read the conversation. And so every conversation is an opportunity to persuade another person. And like any conversion, you might not do it instantly, but if you're going to do it, you might as well be more persuasive. So I've looked a little bit at some of the research, and this is genuine advice, despite what I've said, to help vegans be a little bit more persuasive, right? And so the main guy that has done research into this is Nemeth, right? And what he's shown is that a minority can influence the majority just by starting a discussion. So all the work Matt does, like the research shows that starting a discussion it is the strongest thing. And by starting a discussion, I don't mean shouting or preaching or getting angry, but actually discussing openly. And one of the most persuasive things you can do is show flexibility. So in the social psychology research, he showed that if you were flexible and compromising in your discussion towards the majority position, you affected the majority a lot more than if you were inflexible and uncompromising. Right?
That makes sense. Yeah, I can see the logic of that.
Yes.
It's like the idea of step change, right? Some people talk about this, like imagine a line of like 1 to 100 or a circle, however you want to imagine it. And like the more information that you know about what's going on in slaughterhouses, maybe you visit one, maybe you watch a documentary, maybe you've got a vegan sibling. It's kind of, you're adding up these points where you're being exposed to this idea. And then maybe to reach 100, then you're like, that's when you can say, oh, I'm a vegan or whatever. So it's just opening these ideas in people's minds that, oh, they can change and here's another way of doing things. And it's like...
Just to touch on that as well, I mean, yeah, it's great, to get into conversations with people, but not everyone is open to conversation. And like every movement in the whole of history, that sounded terrible. Like every movement throughout history, there's various forms of activism. So, in the vegan movement, street activism, talking to people is great. It doesn't always work, but a lot of the time it does. But then we have other forms that I've taken part in as well, like protests. So you could be outside of like a McDonald's, or you could go into McDonald's and do like a speech or something. And even though that's annoying to a lot of people, there's that one person who might be sitting in the corner who's already had a seed planted in his or her head from a previous conversation, who then sees a bunch of vegans coming in and saying, you could do better with your decisions, encourage them to make, better decisions in regards to food. And that person, could go home a vegan from sitting in McDonald's.
But this is what I'm saying, mate. You're like, I might be annoying, but I might persuade one person.
No, not necessarily. I'm just saying that
there's a better way.
I'm just saying that from that's maybe that's subjective. I mean, as I was saying, like with a movement, you have to include various forms of activism in order to be effective, right? And if that means breaking into a slaughterhouse and getting footage, I'm not condoning that, of course, but I'm just saying that that has happened and it has worked where footage has then been obtained, and then people have seen that video and been horrified by what they've seen, and then on the back of that have gone vegan.
But we shouldn't even have to steal those footage, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The
Well,
government should make that footage available, I think, to everyone. But
yeah. But yeah, like, I mean, there's a famous quote by Paul McCartney, of all people, Sir Paul McCartney, sorry.
He
said,
got into veganism through a vegan girlfriend. I tell you, it's the most common route.
Well, he famously said that even though he was in the 90s, he did say, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, then everyone would go vegetarian. He said vegetarian, but obviously, nowadays he probably would mean vegan. But I think that's just an important point to raise there. And so, as I say, as a movement, it's not just about just doing one thing. You have to include lots of other forms of activism to make it an effective movement.
Okay, well,
and that's been proven over and time again throughout history.
There's no
whether
one
that be
way.
the suffragettes or yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, Matt, I think that's a valid point, but let me just deep dive a bit into what the social psychology research found, and then we'll see, how that compares to some of the people who are doing their activities, and whether you think that applies to your area, right?
Okay.
So my favourite psychologist in this area was called Moscovici, and he did some really interesting experiments on how minorities can persuade a majority of people. And the way he did that was he would get very common 2 people in the experiment who are stooges. They're actors, right? And they're in on the experiment in a group of 10 people. He was actually able to, if the minority consistently agreed with each other, they could make people think that green was blue. And in some of these experiments, people just say, to go along with the group. But in this experiment, even like a day afterwards, people had still shifted their perception of what color was what. So he was able to genuinely change the majority's perception. And this is some Jedi mind trick hacking, which, and he went on and studied this more and more and all the variables. And so from that, he came to a guideline for how a minority can be the most persuasive. So if you allow me to go into this, and at the end we'll dissect whether you agree or how you think you can apply it to your activism, right? So what he found was that a consistent minority, they disrupt the established norms, and that creates uncertainty, doubt, and conflict. And that's that cognitive dissonance I was talking about earlier, right? And I think in that moment of doubt and conflict, that's crucial. And if you annoy, then people are going to go with their gut, which is, you're making me feel uncomfortable, therefore I dislike you. But if you handle that right, that's going to be a learning moment and a moment of change. And so in order to do that effectively, the variables he found were most consistent, right? With the minority had confidence in the correctness of their ideas and the views that they were presenting, right? So confidence was key. And they sounded correct and coherent and logical. The next point, they had to appear unbiased. So this comes back to Nemeth's research as well. They had to be a bit flexible and not appear too biased and too prejudiced in the way they were coming at the discussion. And the final point, he found that the minority had to be consistent in resisting the social pressure and any abuse that came during their arguments. So if you get those 3 things, apparently you're going to have a very strong minority that over time will be able to persuade the majority. So,
and I think there's another point that we can actually even now add on top of that, on top of those 3 points that you've just made. I've been just through my previous employment in sales and marketing as well, like you have been, Chris. I found that taking an altruistic approach is also very helpful. Asking questions back to people, so what do you think of this? How does this make you feel? What do you know about this? Those sort of questions really open people up, and you'd be surprised to see how many people contradict themselves, realize, and then suddenly, it's like a moment of clarity. And then they start to connect with what you're saying. And I find that that's an even more important way of of opening up people, or as you were saying, than these 3 points.
Yeah, I don't want to bring this down too far, lads, but Socrates was the grandfather of this idea, and we know how he ended. He was put to death for corrupting the youth of Athens.
That's a different time, though.
Yeah, it's true. It was 2,000 years ago. So,
we haven't changed at all,
is
mate.
key. Open questioning is absolutely key in fostering any kind of open debate and dialogue, which I think is the point of what we're trying to do with Beyond Binary is get people to generate these dialogues that aren't necessarily left versus right, carnist versus vegan, to open it up to get people to see that there's a multitude of different options.
Yeah, that's what it is for me as well. Like I try to explain people. I don't like the labels necessarily as much because it forces you into a certain, are you this completely? Or if you're not completely, then what are you? I see it very. It's not an allergy for me, right? When people are like, "Oh, there might have been." I once drank a beer, and this was when I wasn't really thinking about is beer vegan. And someone at my table Googled if beer was vegan, and he found out that the beer I was drinking wasn't vegan. And then for the next 15 minutes, they were riling up against me.
I've had exactly the same
how
thing.
I could be drinking a non-vegan beer. But for me, it's a not binary. It's an analog dial. I'm trying to become more moral aware person, and trying just to improve myself every day. And if everyone was doing that, and if everyone was looking at themselves honestly and fairly, and trying to make themselves a bit better human beings, then I think veganism will become a lot more accepted and widespread practice.
Yeah. It's a really fascinating point, Moraine. I think veganism could be like the ideal to aim for, right? Mm-hmm. And then the closer that you can get to the ideal, the better you're going to feel in terms of less cognitive dissonance, and that your actions are aligned with what you believe is the best way to live your life. And it's like a process. And in that example that you said, it's like, what was gained from that conversation? Well, apart from your mates making fun of you, you've gained some more information about what beer's vegan and what isn't. So now you know that next time it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to have that one, but what other beers can I have?
I think Meringue's hit on a really important point, because and it is dense, like my summary of Moscovici's work, but one of the key points in a minority that persuades is that they're consistent, right? And they're consistent with one another. And that's a lot of the problem with activists. It's not just veganism. You see a lot of liberal groups. Any group that says, we believe in these values, and they gather around in a circle and form an in-group, there is a danger that they become there's a subreddit dedicated to it called gatekeeping, right? Like the no true Scotsman fallacy. So, you're not a real vegan because you do this. And that's how consistency as a minority breaks down when you start criticizing each other. You did that. And vegans are sometimes guilty of eating each other.
Yeah, but so is everyone, though. So is everyone.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point.
I think vegans are more blamed for this than most people, though.
Well, no, but
I'm also a Tottenham Hotspur fan, right? Spurs fan, and I'm in Spurs forums on Facebook, and I tell you what, there are some outrageous claims from people saying you can't be a Spurs fan if you like Daniel Levy. Sorry, Daniel Levy's the chairman of Tottenham.
Okay.
And he's a businessman over anything else. But it's so easy, especially nowadays with social media, to just lay into people for anything. And I'm on vegan groups on Facebook. I'm on Spurs groups on Facebook, and I just constantly see battles.
Yeah.
And it's outrageous because we're all on the same team, whether that be a Spurs fan or a vegan. And sometimes it's shocking to see, the backlash to someone asking a question or saying something, I've got a cat and I still feed it meat. Does that make me not vegan? And people are just laying into that person. And
I'd like to make a side point here as well related to that. I've been doing a few social experiments on Facebook lately because I'm interested in this aspect of veganism, that there was a new definition saying that, maybe you've heard of this, guys. There's a new definition saying that veganism should also include, insofar as possible, educating people and doing some kind of activism for veganism, and also not destroying the habitats of animals, because that in turn like kind of restricts them and makes them suffer. So I've been toying with this idea, and because I'm new to veganism, I thought, well, I'll do a post about the podcast. Why does everyone hate vegans? I'll do a few others, or different kind of images showing you how easy it is to cook as a vegan, or here's some delicious vegan food, or an activist video from the Cube, for example, Matt, one of those videos that you said was one of your favorites. Shared that. And it's interesting to see the different interaction. And what surprised me most was something Chris said earlier, was that say 100 people comment, not many people like the post, some people are getting involved making lots of comments, but that's being seen by a whole other group of kind of fringe spectators. So I think that's a really important key point. And I've been trying to take the opposite approach to what you described, Matt, in the Hotspurs group or the vegan groups. I try as hard as I can to not have an argument, which is really difficult, right? Especially online.
I mean, Facebook wasn't made for peaceful discussion, let's be honest.
Perhaps not, but it was made to connect people.
I'd like to interject this. There's two things I'd really like to pull apart that I thought were fascinating. You just said that how to be a real vegan, you should be involved in activism that persuades people, right? And also, you shouldn't do this. And those two, you shouldn't partake in any agriculture that disrupts an animal's habitat. Now, those two things...
You should try not to, yeah.
Well, there you go. Those two things are diametrically opposed. I'm telling you, vegans will be more persuasive as activists when they stop finger pointing and getting the circle closer and tighter and becoming judgmental. Moscovici's very clear on this. You need a consistent, together team of people. And if you keep looking for, I'm better than you don't do that, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that, you're picking the wrong enemies, really. Like, Team Vegan needs to gang up and be clear about what they want.
Consistent in is not, are you vegan? Are you wholly vegan that does everything correct? What you need to be consistent about, I think, is the continuous improvement of yourself and the lives of other people. And if you want to consistently improve that, then it doesn't matter if you fall down once or twice, or you don't do it exactly the way you need to do it, or maybe people even have different ideas on how you need to do it. Take, for example, shellfish, if we're talking about what is the definition even of veganism, is it to avoid suffering? I've heard this mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. Shellfish has not been scientifically proved at all that they are able to experience suffering because they do not have a central nervous system. So it's basically a sea vegetable. But then there's plenty of vegans that will say you're not vegan if you do. I read an article about someone that says, I'm eating this now and I don't consider myself a vegan anymore because I eat this now. I'm like, okay, so you pushed yourself out of the in-group of vegans because now you don't think you hold yourself to the holiest ideal anymore, even though you had a perfectly good scientific explanation on why you're doing it.
I think that hits upon key, the headline of this podcast. Why do people hate vegans? And it was amazing. My friend said it, first comment, right? Nailed it. She goes, well, like any group, it's the extremes. Right, it's the same with religious people. You meet a moderate, reasonable, open-minded person, you like them, and you're more willing to listen to their perspective. You meet someone that's an absolutist, that's like, you're either with us or you're against us. They're a Puritan. They're like, like every single thing, go down the list. Yeah, wrong. Well, I don't want to invite that person to my party, so they're not going to get the opportunity to persuade me. So every group, the extremists, the gatekeepers, the exclusionary people are going to be the ones that turn people off to the movement. And those that are a bit more flexible and a bit more understanding, at the end of the day, it's a minority position. But how much has it changed in the last 20 years? I remember Morrissey saying meat is murder and chuckling at that, being like, that's ridiculous. Whereas now that doesn't even seem like an out there position. I remember veganism being a minority, strange position for a few hippies. And now more and more people I speak to, it's becoming common. And as you
Isn't Morrissey a vegan now? Just sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. Isn't Morrissey a vegan? Or he is now, I think, right?
I mean, I don't know about the vegan-vegetarian dichotomy. But yeah, I mean, my point is that he used to seem fringe and funny. And now I think his position is accepted.
Yeah, Yeah, that's really on point, man. I think like people shouldn't take themselves too seriously as well. Like the whole point, your whole point about absolutism, being shrill, whining, nagging. I think people connect a lot more if you make jokes, and it is a serious issue, of course. But I think I posted a vegan joke. What do you call a vegan post-punk band? Soy Division. It's a really silly joke. But people liked it, they were just like, oh yeah, it's quite funny, So yeah, maybe people should look inside and examine whether they're mentioning their veganism to persuade and save like the maximum amount of number of animals and reduce suffering and maybe change people's way of thinking about animals, or if it's coming from a place of pride, like you said, Chris. I think maybe these absolutists maybe are very proud of themselves for having such righteous, in quote marks, views. So it's better to start a conversation. As you've explained to us, the research says we should be flexible, consistent, confident, as unbiased as possible, and handle the pressure.
Just on what Finn said there, just quickly. I mean, if you could define what veganism is, it is about minimizing that the suffering of animals and the damage of our local and world environment, and that's literally the core of what veganism is. So it's not. I'd leave it at that.
I think self-confidence isn't shrill, right? It doesn't have to whine or nag, and it can crack jokes, and it smiles, and it doesn't take itself too seriously. And if people want to be persuasive, I hope that they bring on those values. I think it's easy to focus on the extreme people with odd opinions that are put on TV and get shared a lot on social media. We're missing the point, though, because there's a reason those people get given a microphone, and that's because their views are extreme. And this happens with all sorts of things, not just veganism, right? Like, you get 3 angry guys holding up a placard saying "Death to the West," and they'll get a camera and a microphone shoved in their face. So the media is partly at fault here, and social media as well. The most extreme reaction is what drives the headlines. So it's easy for us to say, look at these vegan assholes pushing their agenda. But those are the ones that are going to get amplified the most. It's not necessarily representative of the group at all. It's just the people with the weird extreme views are the ones that are going to get the loudest megaphone. And
however,
that's
I feel like, sorry.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Sorry, I was going to say, however, I feel like that's if you look at like the BBC and ITV, they have those talk shows like This Morning and things like that. They have had vegan activists on there in the past year, and I guess. And they've had like a dairy farmer on there with them, or a chef or something like that against them. And it's always been the presenters and the chef or the dairy farmer versus the vegan. But in more noticeably in this year, like people like Earthling Ed and Joey Carbstrong, very well known activists, vegan activists, they've had a voice on these platforms, and they've really taken it by the scruff of the neck. And I think they've surprised mainstream media so much now that now mainstream media like BBC and ITV have actually started to take it more seriously, veganism more seriously.
It's a great point.
And I feel that, and I just to add to that as well. The reason I think that is because BBC literally this what are we now, September, aren't we? Yeah, so literally beginning of this month had a little 1 hour documentary about dairy, the dairy industry. That is called The Dark Side of Dairy, and they really went like in depth with like how shocking the dairy industry is, and it touched a lot about like live exports and things like that. But I don't think they would have taken that so seriously had it been that these activists that had gone on to their live shows hadn't have made such a strong argument for veganism.
Yeah, I think for those who want to look at an excellent example of that sort of debate, it was Piers Morgan, Prince of Pricks. He was interviewing Anthony Worrell Thompson, that chef?
Yeah.
And a vegan activist.
Jerry Carbstrong.
There you go, right? And they were debating, and then Piers brings up like, "Oh, what about your history? And I hear you used to be a violent person, da da da." And the hilarious thing is, it was meant to be the classic TV format of this person's going to argue with this person, and then the chef jumps in and goes, "Whoa, Piers, you're being a prick. Like, leave the guy alone." It's the best interview ever. I can't recommend you watch it enough because Piers is just
it's really good.
detestable that he ends up unifying the guests who are meant to be arguing against him.
Yeah. And in fact, from that show, there's actually now a famous quote within the vegan community now. You see it on T-shirts, you see it everywhere, and it's "You're not a baby cow, bro," because that vegan activist said that to Piers when he was talking about drinking milk. It's now imprinted.
Really
there you go. Piers is good for something, clearly.
He's an Arsenal fan as well, so I detest him even more.
Oh, don't get started.
Sorry, guys.
What's your favorite controversial opinion on this topic, everyone? For me, it's the fact that people keep saying vegans are leading bad diets. They're killing their kids. They're deficient in B12, D, iron, protein, and all this is causing issues. Even though scientific evidence is proven that vegan diet is not deficient in anything.
Has it? Let's break that down a bit, man. You answered
B12
your own
maybe.
question a bit quick. So.
Listen. B12 is you'll have to get fortified products or get vitamin supplements. But you know what's the bad thing about vitamin supplements or fortified products? They're available.
I want to go on to vitamin B12 just really quickly because it's quite an underdiagnosed deficiency in the general population. If anyone is aged over 65, about 1 in 10 people need to have vitamin B12 supplementation. And then after 75 years old, even more people need it. And there are also people who I know who eat a meat and dairy diet, but they still have a vitamin B12 deficiency. It's because it comes from a bacteria that's found in the soil, and because of our hygiene standards nowadays, less enters into our food. So really everyone could supplement. Really everyone could supplement vitamin B12, and it would probably be helpful.
This is also, Finn, you're touching on why I do not like the argument, because people all take B12 as being humans need it. We can't get it from plants, so humans can thereby, by their nature, not be vegans. But they're completely forgetting the fact that we used to get this bacteria into our foods when we had different hygiene standards in the past. And definitely when we were monkeys, we were just eating rotten food anyway and getting the B12 through that. So there's nothing sort of philosophically natural about the fact that we need to fortify our foods with B12. And other than that, the proteins that we eat, you see a lot of people just not understanding the fact that what we eat from the animals themselves get from the plants. And so if you're going straight to the plants, you're getting still the same nutrients. And people completely missing on that point. When I've spoken to people about it, they were like, "Oh, really? I've never thought about it that way." And
there's really good examples of the YouTube channels of people like Vegan Gains and vegan bodybuilders who like have like crazy bodies, and they're just eating a plant-based diet. They're vegans. There's also the US, like one of the US world record holders for weightlifting is vegan, and the UK head of Ninja Warrior. I don't know if you've heard about that competition. He's the head of the EU team or the rest of the world team, and he's vegan, and he says there were a lot of benefits to him going vegan in terms of his performance, which is really curious. They're all living examples that disprove some of these points about protein.
I mean, I think the exception, and here's where I do draw the line, is you see dogs and cats fed on a vegan diet. And although it's debatable whether humans are omnivores or herbivores, there's no debate on dogs and cats. They should be eating meat. And I have seen some pretty sad pictures of some pretty malnourished animals.
Yeah, exactly. Did you look for malnourished animals?
Isn't that because of the product?
whose
Chris,
whose owners have forced them on a vegan diet because that's their views.
I think it's
and that's their
important.
politics.
I think it's important to separate cats and dogs at this point because cats are naturally carnivorous.
Because they'll fight like cats and dogs.
but we know through a lot of science recently that dogs can live on a plant-based diet. And I'm not sure about cats, but I know that dogs can. They for instance, they produce their own taurine within themselves, so they don't have to get that from meat-based products or anything like that. So it's that's one key aspect of their diet that suggests that they can be plant-based and thrive. And in fact, on top of that, one of the oldest ever dogs to live, it's a bit anecdotal, but one of the oldest ever dogs to live was a vegan dog. Yeah. It's very Googleable, that is.
All right. With relation to cats, if you feed your cat veg, it will just go out and kill 100 birds. And mice.
No, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. And do you know what I mean? I've got a good friend where I live, and she has cats, and she's a very strongly opinionated vegan. She's an activist, and she's quite well known in the vegan community. Yeah, she does have cats, and she does feed it a raw meat diet. Or them,
well, she chose a predatory carnivorous animal, right?
Yeah.
As a pet, so she could have gone for a rabbit or hamster.
Just to clarify, they weren't pets; they were rescues. So they're just to home in on that, because that is quite important. Yeah, there is massive distinction, and it's very easy to miss over that. Forget that point.
No, I find this hilarious. Bill Burr's take on this is hilarious. Anytime someone mentions that they rescued a dog, you're like, what was it? In a river and you jumped in and saved it? No. Like, you went to a place remarkably similar to a pet store. Yeah.
Most of it's people who abandon their pets because they're inconvenient, and then they get taken in by rescue shelters, and then they need somewhere to live, and they live in a rescue shelter until someone says, right, well, I'll take care of them.
I know.
Well, I mean, it's just a point that needs to be made as well. Just in the UK, the RSPCA does put down tens of thousands of dogs and cats a year because, and they were rescues, but because they cannot house them. So it's important as well, even within the vegan movement, it doesn't matter if you're vegan or not. It's important to highlight this fact that there is a difference between pets and an animal that you've essentially saved, because it is a save. That animal, if it can't get rehoused, then it's only going to be a burden on that shelter or on the RSPCA for costs. So it will have to get put down. And the way they put them down as well, again, RSPCA approved, is through gas chambers, which is horrendous.
Jesus, can I raise the mood a little bit? Fucking hell.
Yeah, well, do you know what I mean? Like, vegans do tend to be some of the most angry and sad people on the planet. But
can I say, Matt? Yeah, I'd like to thank you sincerely, because you've mostly been upbeat and chipper until that moment.
Yeah.
So moving swiftly on, what are the common logical fallacies that we hear from either groups on this side of the debate?
Who are you directing at? Sorry.
Anyone who wants it.
So
have you heard any logical fallacies from meat eaters, or have you heard any logical fallacies from your own kind?
Oh yeah, I mean many from both, I guess. But it depends. Again, that's the entry barrier that you highlighted earlier. If you're talking about vegans, but another non-vegan fallacy and argument that I hear every day from people, whether that be online or on a conversation with someone in the street or whatever. The whole plants have feelings too debate. And that is
the plants though, bro.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? It's probably one of the most infuriating topics that I've had to endure.
And it's intentionally designed to undermine your point, right?
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
what it's about.
Yeah.
It's like those when people talk about trans people, and there's a group of people that go, well, I identify as an attack helicopter, so
yeah.
And you're like, right, I see what you're doing, but what you're doing is not logically coherent, because no one actually identifies as an attack helicopter. And likewise, no one genuinely believes that we should be concerned for plants' feelings. They're just trolling.
Maybe in like 1,000 years. like when society is completely changed, and we can't even imagine what it's going to be like. Maybe then people care about plants, and that's great, but it comes down to necessity, doesn't it? How do we survive? Well, we need nutrients, and what's the least amount of suffering? Eating plants. It's as simple as that.
And one thing I say is, if you had a cow and a carrot in front of you, which one are you going to chop up?
Yeah. Which one is gonna look at you with actual eyes, where you can see that they're actually aware of what is going on?
How many people have I got to feed?
Quite a good degree.
If I've got 500 people to feed, I ain't going to be the carrot, I tell you.
But then again, that's a hypothetical argument altogether, and that's another thing that you come across, those sort of hypothetical.
Oh mate, have you not got the point of this podcast yet? It's all hypothetical nonsense.
Well, in that case,
yeah, but it is a logical fallacy, Chris, for sure.
Yeah.
Matt
like
have
I been stuck on a desert island? Would you eat the animal that you're with, or would you, all those sort of arguments? But yeah. I'm never going to be stuck with one carrot and one cow and having 500 people to feed. So,
I think if we're going to talk logical fallacies, now this is an interesting one because I'm presenting a fallacy that I am myself guilty of. So this is confession time.
You get bonus points. You get beyond binary bonus points for that.
Yeah. Do I get a hat?
I think you do. You get a free hat for that, don't you?
Oh,
for spotting
nice.
a logical fallacy.
They're coming, right, Chris?
Nice. Yeah, we've ordered some nice hats.
Sweet. I'll be on that.
Yeah, definitely going to share. Oh, you get one, mate. You've earned it.
Oh, nice one. Thank you.
But I think it's easy to generalize, as I say, the stereotypical straw man vegan who's nagging, he's an idealist, he's a pedant, he's a gatekeeper, he's exclusive, he's virtue signaling, he's embarrassing. Honestly, I think in any single group, as you say, even Tottenham Hotspurs fans, right? The people that want to nag are going to nag. And the people that are idealists, they think in ideals. And the people that are pedants, they want to be pedantic. And people that are gatekeepers want to exclude. And so I think it's very easy when you don't want to follow someone's advice or their rhetoric to pick a straw man and say, look at that person, they're annoying, why would I follow that person? But honestly, as we've shown with Matt today, you're always going to find reasonable, coherent, polite, charming people. It's too easy to pick the extremes of any group. And like we say, the media is more likely to give those weirdos a microphone, which is unfortunate. And that's what this podcast is about, I think, is giving the reasonable people the opportunity
giving the weirdos
for dialogue.
a microphone.
No, no, like the opposite, giving the people that are more centrist, that understand the middle ground, that are prepared to discuss nuance, the microphone. Because traditional media, not even traditional, like social media is worse, if anything, just giving a megaphone to the most extreme views because it's clickbait, because it provokes a reaction in people, right?
Yeah, I'd like to mention one more logical fallacy, which is the appeal to nature. This is a really interesting one where people say, have you heard about this anthropologist who theorizes that the development of humans, their evolution, in a large part, the growing of their brain was due to eating meat, and that's why we've evolved to think in such a way and form society, and so on and so forth. This is a really interesting argument, but I don't really feel it's relevant because as a vegan, you can even accept that argument and it doesn't change your decision today of, do you have the choice to eat meat or not?
Sure.
I have the choice and I just choose not to.
We evolved bigger brains to make the choice to stop eating meat, right?
Yeah, so maybe it's like the next step of evolution is like we have to then overcome the ways that we evolved in the past that now no longer serve a purpose.
I mean, isn't evolution as well the fact that we're not just aware of ourselves, but we could be aware of others? So we can be aware of the suffering of other beings as well, other than our own.
It's part of it. Mm-hmm.
So...
Well, exactly. I mean, this hints back to evolutionary psychology, that we used to have a very small in-group and we only cared for our tribe. And then as we've developed and evolved, our group has got larger and larger, and it went to a city-state and then went to a nation-state and then went beyond that with religion. And now, because of capitalism, it's even bigger than that. And, we're all part of the world economy.
And what about What about environmentalism, the idea of Gaia, the idea of a planet-wide?
So beyond speciesism,
Exactly. Yeah.
people are becoming more aware, and also there's more choices than there used to be. I honestly, my heart goes out to people who 30 years ago living in Asia decided to be vegetarians because your choice on a menu would be one thing.
Right.
And those are stronger people than me. I told Matt this. I would not be willing to go vegan if it meant that I'd forever, every restaurant I went to, be limited by one choice when everyone else had 60 choices.
It does get rid of
communism, man.
No, that's part of the
get rid
fight.
of the anxiety of choice, doesn't it?
Yes.
It does, yeah. But it's also part of the fight. If you are part of that demand, that if you are if you are passionate about being living a vegan lifestyle, and you do pick that that vegan option on the menu, then that vegan option will become two vegan options because of demand, and and then before you know it, you've got a vegan menu. And that's the case. Actually, I work part-time in a pub near where I live, and I've been working there 6 months, and I've seen that vegan menu become a vegan menu in the first place. It had one or two options before, and now there's like a whole separate menu because
and that's how things will grow,
people
man.
are demanding that.
It's how it always does, right? There's going to be the people that are the first movers, right, and are prepared to sacrifice because morally that they see it quickly. They're the people that are quickly moved by the morality and quickly persuaded, and the front runners of the group. And there's going to be those people that will only start considering it when it's very easy to walk around Asda and there's loads of options and they're on the main shelves, not in the weird aisle they never go on, right? But that's the way we're moving. Like it's becoming more and more mainstream, and
it's becoming more and more important as well, I think.
Yes.
Right? It's becoming more and more important environmentally. It's becoming more and more important because the third world is starting to consume more and more animal products, like the first world has been. And so we cannot keep producing more and more and more and more. And it's becoming more important because right now the alternatives are there up for grabs. The fact that we have lab-grown meat, I think it's going to be a big change if it's going to be internationally put onto the market.
I'd like to quickly
against it.
interject.
Yeah.
I'd like to quickly interject, Marianne. There's also plant-based meat alternatives like the Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger. And these are really interesting, and some of them are even so realistic. Apparently, when a vegan tried one, they threw up once. There's a little anecdote I heard. These are plant-based products which are really apparently very close to the taste of an actual burger.
Yeah, they
that
are.
bleed,
Yeah.
that have the same flavour profile, and that have more protein and are healthier.
You guys should have gone to Tesco. Because there's a steak
Yeah, Vivera.
for sale at Tesco, made by Dutch company.
Oh, mate, yes, of course, absolutely. I was going to say Vivera, one of the... I don't tend to buy too many sort of vegan meats and things like that. I try and stick to as much as a whole foods diet as I can, but occasionally I buy the fish goujons or the meat or the steaks from Vivera, which are from Holland. Oh my god, they're fantastic, and
They're good.
yeah, oh yeah, and don't get me wrong. I just want to make this point that I didn't give up meat because I didn't like it. I didn't give up dairy or eggs because I didn't like it. So the fact that it does taste like meat is not an issue for me at all. And they do taste amazing. They do taste amazingly close to meat as well. The Beyond Meat burger is probably the closest to tasting like meat than any other product I've tried personally.
Yeah, I'd love to try all of these.
Yeah,
I think that lower barrier to entry is going to get more and more people engaging in this. And I think also as more and more people become vegan, you're going to get less of the extreme people and more reasonable people who are prepared to engage. And we've all noticed now that there's not someone necessarily preaching, but like you said, Merang, a guy at work, and he wasn't eating meat, he wasn't talking about it. We asked him, and then we encouraged him to talk, and then he gently talked about it, and that got my attention, and that got my, that persuaded me more and started me thinking more open-mindedly about it. So I think the take-home message I want to deliver to both vegans and non-vegans is that, understand that if you're telling people meat is murder, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance and guilt wrapped up in that statement. And as we hinted at before, that's a learning moment, or it's a moment to make people really insecure and angry and unhappy. And I think that's why it needs to be handled carefully. But the truth is, there is obviously a lot of unjustifiable cruelty. And I think if people truly looked in their hearts, they are horrified by the industrialized meat industry. And look, if anyone listening disagrees with me, I would love to hear your rationalization for why eating meat is moral or fair or reasonable or the best way to act. Like, please guys, like, bring it, because I've been thinking about it for the last 2 months in preparation for this episode, and I'm struggling. It is getting harder and harder to justify it, because all I can say is, well, meat is yummy. And on the scales of morality, that doesn't really counterbalance what an animal goes through in a slaughterhouse, or how much carbon emissions come from that industry, or, you know, how bad it is for our health compared to the alternatives. And so genuinely, like, I thank you, gentlemen, for having this dialogue, because just opening up in a polite and persuasive way, as always, it is better than, I think, the alternative.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks from me too.
It was a pleasure, Chris.
Mm-hmm. Always a pleasure. So, Chris, would you be up for a vegan challenge of some kind?
Oh, yes.
All right.
For example, if we were to get 10 reviews on iTunes, would you consider going vegan for 22 days?
10?
5?
No.
Look, if we get 20 reviews on iTunes, I will go vegan for
20
2
days.
months.
Okay, 2 months.
20
There's
reviews.
there's something called a 22 challenge.
challenge,
Challenge
yes.
22.
I'm a mentor
and
on
there's a
that.
website. There's a website
All
for
right,
it. What's the
for
website,
every
Matt?
10 reviews we get of our podcast, I will do a 22-day challenge.
Yeah, that's great, Chris. Just to highlight that the challenge is called challenge22.com, which is what you were just talking about there, Finn. It's basically you go onto the website, you sign into a Facebook group, and you are assigned a mentor, and you're given daily challenges. All the mentees are together on this group. As daily challenges include like recipes that you can put together, like, you know, make your own burgers, or like do, you know, something similar like that, like make your own stir fries, or you know, like a fruit bowl or something like that, a Buddha bowl rather. You've got things like, oh, here's a shopping list, go to the supermarket, look at these ingredients over the other over animal products. You know, have a conversation with someone who's not vegan. Things like that. So they're like daily challenges that you can do for 22 days. And the point of that being that it's 22 days is because it enforces a habit. 21 days, apparently, according to science, is the sort of the point where you have already forced a habit. So obviously just add another day on top of that, and that's why it's 22 days. But as I say, you've got a mentor, you've got a dietitian on there if you've got any questions about sort of like, you know, B12 and things like that. And yeah, you just bounce off each other. Like, all mentees have questions they can ask at any time, things like that. It's really good. It's really good. And as I say, I'm a mentor on there myself. So,
all right, if we get 10 reviews, I will sign up for the 22-day challenge. How's
yes, go on, lad.
Sounds like a good plan. Nice one, Chris.
So, guys, Orville and Wilbur Wright, when they were inventing flight, they would often put themselves in opposing positions, and they'd argue all morning, and then at lunchtime they would switch. So you'd have to argue the opposite to the position you held all morning, right? And that thought experiment was what enabled them to see the other person's perspective, and the creative tension it made was part of what led to the discovery of flight.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying there, Chris, is obviously don't bury yourself in one perspective, one way of thinking. If you push yourself to see the other perspective, then you can better your own argument, and you can help that other person see clearly where you're coming from, right?
You didn't like my flight pun?
No, I was doing my best to avoid it.
Chris, do the pun, Chris.
Oh, mate, like, look, if you're able to think from another's perspective, who knows what ideas might take flight. Hey, from London, I'm Chris.
From Amsterdam, it's Marijn.
From Cordoba, I'm Finn.
And from London, I'm Matt.
Cheers, guys. Thanks so much.